Hi, I'm Robert Joseph, and today I'm going to teach you how to make this sexy little number. This is a T-Back Thong. It's pattern number 87, and it actually comes in two views. And this here on the mannequin is view B, and I'm just going to turn it around really quickly. So it does have a T-back style, as you can see here with the T. So this view is different from view A, in which I incorporate actually 1-inch elastic for the sides area and for the strap here in the center back. So just make sure that you're watching the correct video. This is actually view A, which I have a separate video for. The fabric around the side goes all the way around to the T-back. So I just wanted to point that out. And if you can't see the elastic very well, I have a sample here for the front, and it has the elastic for the sides and for the center back strap. So I'm going to get to teaching you how to put this together, and I'm going to explain the pattern right after the intro. So we're about to get started on cutting the fabric out for the T-back thong. This is view B. So view B is different than view A because it has just elastic straps for the side area and the back center strap. So I'll get to those in just a minute. So the other thing that you need to know about this view is that the seam allowances are different. So where the elastic attaches to the front and the T-back and also in the center back here, the seam allowances are a 1/2 inch. And the reason I did that is because when you fold it over and top stitch it, as you will see in the video later on, that for home sewing machines, it's really difficult to get that much thickness, especially on a knit, to actually sew through the machine for a top stitch. So I chose to do a 1/2 inch seam allowance here on this side and the T-back here. For anywhere there is this 1-inch elastic. Now the seam allowance for this center front seam here is the usual 1/4 inch seam allowance. So just be aware of that. So I do have a note on all my patterns that say it says all seam allowances are 1/4 inch seam width unless otherwise stated on pattern. And I have a 1/2 inch stated here, 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 and here. So that's the difference. For the leg opening area and also here on the curved back part of the T part of the back, I'm actually using 3/8 inch elastic, and 3/8 inch elastic is pretty standard for me anywhere the leg openings are. So I also have 3/8 inch elastic here at the top waist of the front and on the back part. Now today I'm going to be using this knitted black knit elastic, and normally I wouldn't use knit elastic on swimwear. This is actually better for like underwear or sleepwear. The better elastic to use is braided elastic, and you've normally seen me use the swimwear elastic, which is cotton wrapped polyester or cotton wrapped rubber, and that holds up much better in the water. So, but if you can't find that and you can just find regular poly braided elastic, it's a little bit heavier and it holds up a little bit better in the wear. So this knit elastic, it's okay, and I'm just doing this as a tutorial, but we'll have a look at what it looks like afterwards. But this knit elastic doesn't really hold up real well to many thicknesses of fabric, and I'm going to be lining this front piece today, so I'll have a couple of thicknesses there, so the stretch amount that I give you may not be quite enough. So this knit elastic may not have enough recovery for with that thickness of fabric. So we'll just see how it holds up. So just be aware, if you can find braided elastic, that would be better for the swimwear. So that's what I'm going to use today. The other elastic that I'm going to be using for the side areas, so this elastic will go here, attaching the front and the back of the thong. I'm going to be using this 1-inch elastic, and I've made the pattern using 1-inch wide elastic, so you'll need to look for that in the store. The other thing is that if you want to use thinner elastic, you may have to adjust the width here at the sides where you're going to be attaching the elastic. So this is actually knitted elastic again, although it is a colored elastic. This is gray or silver. You can find a lot of different colored elastics online. I haven't found a whole lot at different fabric stores like Joann's or Michael's, but you can actually just search for it online. I think I got this on Amazon from one of the shops there. I'm not sure which one it was. So I'm going to be using gray, and I thought that would go well with this kind of faux snake print here. It's kind of a shimmery silver print, and this is actually the remnant I had from the View A. So I'm going to be using this, using that up, and also I'm going to be lining the front here, the entire lining, lining the entire front here with this white lining. It's called Helenca, H-E-L-E-N-C-A. So if you can find it, this is 100% polyester, and the weave actually doesn't hold the water, so that's why I use it, and it's actually very, very stretchy. So just remember that any kind of lining that you're going to be using in swimwear, you want it to stretch as much as your main fabric, your body fabric, or more. Okay, so with that, I also want to remind you that I have the suggested elastic amounts for the areas around the leg and also the waist areas here. The elastic for the side and the center back strap is actually given here on a pattern piece, so I'll be cutting that out separately. But these measurements here are for when I use this 3/8 inch wide elastic. Okay, so I'm going to get to cutting this out, and you know that I speed that up. So I just wanted to mention really quick that if you have a hard time keeping your elastics straight for whatever part of the garment that you need it for, what I'm going to do, because they're all kind of all similar sizes, what I'm going to do is, this was the one for the front waist. So I'm just going to actually take a piece of tape and tape it there. Now, of course, this is actually my pattern. I would suggest writing on a piece of paper what it's for and then taping it to it. And this one is for the back, the T-back at the waist. These two are actually for the front pouch. Okay, and I actually forgot to mention that the elastic for the curved area of the T-back for view B here, I have it cut to T-back curve elastic. The curve elastic goes here, and I'll need to cut 2 of those. I forgot to do that earlier, so I'm going to do that now. And I need to have 2 of those. So get these cut really quick. And I'll go ahead and tape these 2 to this piece of paper as well. Okay, and tape those to this paper. Now I know what elastic pieces go to what part of the garment. So I'm going to get this all cleaned up and I'll layer everything together. Okay, so I'm ready to get started now, and I'm going to work on the front pouch. So I'm going to set all of these other pieces aside. And also, I just want to mention, you can actually pin your elastic pieces together with the pattern pieces. Usually I take the pattern pieces off and put everything aside or put it away. So I'm going to set these aside, and let's just work with these front pouch pieces. Now I'm going to work with them separately, the lining and then the actual fabric. I'm going to bring my pins in here. Now I cut these face side to face side so I don't have to worry about working with them too much. But what I'm going to do, since this is kind of slippery, I'm going to match these up perfectly. And we're going to be sewing around the outside here, but I'm actually going to stack the 2 pieces together. So I'm going to pin my my garment fabric together here, face side to face side. This is just going to keep it together while I'm working with it, because sometimes, especially swimwear, can be kind of slippery. That didn't want to go through because it's hitting this foil that's on here. Now my lining, I'm going to do the same thing. Try not to stretch the lining. Some of these linings that you work with can stretch out, and it takes a while for them to actually recover. So I'm just going to pin this, going kind of perpendicular here. Notice on this one I have it parallel to the cut edge, and this way I'm doing perpendicular, and that's just for eye purposes to see it, because what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to stack the swimwear fabric on top of the lining fabric. So I want the lining fabric to be against the feed dogs. So the lining stretches a lot more than the swimwear fabric does, so the feed dogs will kind of keep that in check. So I'm going to put that on the bottom when I sew, because I'm going to sew from the bottom or the crotch or inseam all the way up to the waist. So now that I've got these kind of lined up, I'm going to repin this parallel pin, and I'll remove the perpendicular pin. And just make sure that you've got everything lined up here on the edge. And I'm going to repin this parallel pin to the edge, and I'll remove this perpendicular one. Actually, I'm going to put one right here at that notch, and that notch is just to line things up there at the center front. And I'm going to repin here and remove this perpendicular pin. So the reason I pin parallel to the cut edge is because it's going to be easier to remove the pins as I sew, rather than having these perpendicular pins, which if you go too fast or get too excited, your knife will hit that, and then you may have to replace the knife on your overlock machine. So I'll take those out, and we're actually ready to sew. So just one thing I'd like to mention is that you don't have to sew all 4 layers together. If you'd rather sew the lining and then the swimwear fabric, you can do that. I would suggest when you put them together to tack it down here somewhere on the seam allowance, and that will keep it from moving around too much. Okay, but I'm just going to sew all 4 layers together, and let's go over to the overlock machine and do that right now. Okay, so we've got the center front seam of the pouch done, so I'm going to flip this face side out so you can kind of see what that looks like, okay? But I'm going to turn this inside out, and we'll look at the lining. What I want to do is I want to baste the lining around the pouch curve and the waist area. I'm going to baste that together, and what that does is that will just keep the lining in place while I am working with the elastic. So we're actually going to be sewing, on this view, we're going to be sewing the 3/8 wide elastic on to the front pouch and the back tee before we work with the wider 1-inch elastics for the side area and the center back strap. So I like to do this because swimwear tends to be kind of slippery, and this just will keep everything together for me while I'm working with those elastics. And I'm just going to be using the straight stitch on my regular sewing machine, and I'm going to be using a long stitch. You want to use a long stitch because you don't want it to stretch. So I think on this one, the smaller the stitch, the more it will stretch. So I'm probably going to be at a 4 or a 5. Okay, so that's all pinned up, pinned around, and I'm just going to show you really quickly, although I'll speed it up, the basting around this area. Okay, so I've got the lining basted down to the front pouch area, and now we're ready to work with the elastics. So I have all my elastics kind of taped where what elastic goes to what part of the suit, and I'm going to start with the front pouch area. And one thing to note about the elastic is that on each of the ends for these, I would actually leave a little bit, and once I actually overlock them together, I'm going to leave the threads of the overlock long, because we might need those to help it get started through the cover stitch, or if you're using a zigzag. I'm going to be using a cover stitch today. So the elastics here, I have it taped. This is for the front pouch area, so I'm going to take this off. Oops, that ripped. I will just have to print another one out. So those are going to go to the bottom area here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pin underneath, and I'm going to be doing this so that I can see the top of the fabric in the overlock. So having this fabric, this foil fabric on the feed dogs my machine didn't like it. So I'm going to put that here. So I'm going to just pin that. I'm going to start at this end, and then I will just pin up here at the end. And I'm going to overlock all these on, and then I will fold it over to cover stitch on. And these are just for placement. And then you'll just stretch this in, stretch this to fit it in. So I'm just going to get everything pinned here, pinned on. And these won't necessarily really be in the way, but you could actually do them individually if you'd like. But I'm just going to, for time constraints here, I'm just going to pin this. I'm actually just getting all of the elastics pinned on. Now I've got, let me see, the front waist elastic, that's what this is. And we will just trim off the excess after we've folded it over. Now for the front elastic, you could find the center. In fact, I'll show you how to do that really quick if you want to have that done. So let me lay that back out. So this is the elastic for the front waist area here. So I'm going to fold it in half. And I'm going to put a pin here, or you could mark it with chalk. That's good enough. And then match it to the seam here. Okay, I'm going to grab this pin underneath and pin it. The fabric will work with me. Pin that to the center, and then I can match the edge of each of those, each of the elastic edges. And so see, you have some stretch there. And I'm leaving maybe a 1/4 inch. You don't have to, but it's going to be easier to get it started in the sewing machine if you're using a zigzag. Okay, so that's for the front pouch. We just need, again, here, the curved area of the T-back, and then of course the waist. So let's finish this one out. This is the waist area. And again, as I mentioned before, having the elastics taped to a piece of paper or something to let you know what area it goes to will help keep things a little bit organized. I don't really worry about the center on this one because it's such a short length. And you can just stretch it in there. Now I will also mention that for the overlock, and see it stretches right there. For the overlock, I have removed the right needle, so I'm only using 3 threads, a single needle, because I don't need that second needle, and it adds a little bit of bulk. So, and now the last elastics here are for this curved area. Let's see if I can get this off of this paper. The tape stuck really well. All right. Get this pinned up really quick. I know I could have sped up this part, but I wanted to make sure that you could clearly see where all of the different elastics went. And it's not different elastics, it's just elastics for different areas of the garment. And this last one over here. So it looks kind of funny because the elastic is smaller than the area it's being sewn into. But that's to hold it nice and taut against your body when it's being worn. And once you get used to actually making a lot of these, if you make a lot of these, you probably don't really even need to pin it because you'll know exactly what that stretch is after a while. All right, so that's where the elastics are going to be placed. On the front pouch area, and then the T-back for the T-thong in the view B. So I'm going to go over to the overlock, and we're going to actually stitch these down to the garment right now. Okay, so now we have the elastics applied to the garment. And on this one, just so you know, mine looks really stretched. So yours, I've adjusted the elastics for you, for your pattern, because I think this is too much. This is elasticized too much. So I'm adding a little bit more length to your pieces. So for the final pattern, yours may not look as elasticized as mine because I've changed the measurements here for the elastic on the T-back part. And so yours will probably look a little bit more relaxed. Since it's such a small piece in the back, it probably won't stretch out the way we really want it to while it's to be worn. So I've adjusted the elastics for the final pattern. Anyway, so we're good to go with actually turning the elastics to the inside. And the way we're going to do that is we're just going to, you'll need to stretch a little bit, and I'll show you here on the underside. You're going to need to stretch that elastic to roll it over. And you want the edge, you want to feel that elastic hitting the top part of the fabric, and then you can pin it in place. Now, if you're doing a zigzag, you will see the wrong side of your fabric as you're zigzagging it through your machine. But I'm going to be using a cover stitch today, so I'll need to see the face side of the fabric. So I'm going to actually pin and then reverse all the pins, but I want to show you kind of pinning this in place. Now, when I make suits not for a tutorial, I generally don't pin. I may pin in the center and at the end, but I just kind of turn as I go. So I'm going to get this piece pinned. All right, and then here about the center, make sure that gets turned over and that it's nice and flush there at the edge. So I'm not going to take the time to, I'm not going to make you watch me pin all of these edges. I will just magically have it all done, and then you will see the way I have things pinned for the cover stitch. Again, if you don't have a cover stitch machine, you can use a zigzag stitch, a regular zigzag, or a 3-step. If you use a 3-step zigzag, there are 3 stitches in each line of the zig and the zag, and that actually, if one stitch pulls out, you have a little bit of security there that the whole thing isn't going to pull out. Okay, so I'm going to get this all pinned around, and then I'll be right back. Okay, so I have everything pinned, and it looks kind of funny. Now you won't see these pins as I'm sewing in the cover stitch machine, but I wanted to show you with everything kind of pinned under where I'm going to be stitching. So again, if you're using a zigzag, you're going to be seeing the wrong side of the garment. And if you're using a cover stitch, you will see the top side of the garment. Now, each one of these edges on the garment should measure about 1 inch. And you can kind of stretch it a little bit if it's not quite there, because we're going to be using 1-inch elastic for the side area and the back strap. So I'm probably going to be removing all these pins. Like I said, it would be hard. It's challenging to actually get in the sewing machine or the cover stitch machine with all these pins, because you're going to be sticking yourself as you go. So I prefer just to turn it as I sew, but I wanted you to be able to see having where all the edges that need to be turned under are. All right, so I am actually going to set up my cover stitch machine and get going. Now, one note about the regular sewing machine or the cover stitch machine is that if you have trouble getting started here at the beginning parts, that's why I left my threads here long to pull it through. Now, if that doesn't work, you could always put a piece of fabric, a nice stable piece of fabric at the beginning. Most times the reason you have trouble starting at these edges is because it's not really on the feed dogs very well of your machine. So sometimes you can put a piece of nice muslin, a good stable piece of muslin, cotton woven, underneath where the seam allowance is, and sometimes that will help pull it through under the foot as well. Now, my foot probably won't like this, but I'm using a plastic foot, so I'm hoping that it will glide right over the foil. But I think I'm probably gonna, actually I won't be using a plastic foot because I'm using my cover stitch machine and not my regular machine, and I don't have a Teflon foot for that machine, so I may have to help it through the machine. But you will need to stretch to the width of the elastic as you sew along, whether you're using cover stitch or a regular sewing machine. So I'm going to pull out my cover stitch machine and I will show you how that works. Okay, so I'm here at the cover stitch machine. Just a really quick note before I start. I usually speed this part up, which I will. I just want to mention that I'm using 2 needles and they're at a narrow width here. This is actually a 1/8 gauge. The distance between the needles is referred to as gauge. And so what I'm going to be doing, and I've removed the pins from this, is on the top, of course, this is going to be folded over like this, and then I'm going to have to feel with my finger where that edge of the elastic is, and you can kind of see down into the feet there. Probably not so good on camera. Let's see if I tilt this up a little bit. In there, you can kind of see where the elastic edge is. You kind of want to line up this far needle over here on the left to meet the edge here of your stitching, or of the elastic rather. So when you fold it over, you'll put it in here, and this thread kind of helps you kind of pull it underneath to get it started. And I'm probably just going to put the needles down just to hold it into place, and then the presser foot down, and then you'll be able to kind of stretch, but you will have to you'll have to use, you know, more of your hand. You'll have to use several of your fingers, a couple of them at least, because you don't want this to buckle up here. And this is a narrow spot, but I can actually use the thread, if you see here, hold it, kind of get it started by helping it get through that by pulling it just as you sewed in the beginning. And then as you're stretching along, as you stop to regroup and refold, and stretch more, make sure that you have these needles down to hold everything in place so you don't accidentally pull it out of the machine. So I'm going to get going now. Okay, so now that we have all the cover stitching or zigzagging, if you have done that, we've got that all done now on both pieces of the garment. Now I'm going to go, we have all these extra threads, and I'm going to go ahead and trim them all off and trim any excess elastic if it's sticking out. I didn't have that much. And just as a reminder again, I have adjusted your elastics, so yours may not be as elasticized as mine. Just trim all these areas off. That looks all right. There's one last hair underneath here. All right, and I have brought my other elastics in for the side and the back strap. So let's work with this, with the side first. So I've got these pre-cut, and now one thing that you will have to decide and look at your elastic. Some elastics are different than others. You'll have to decide which side you want to see on the outside. And on this side, I feel like when I'm feeling it, this one seems to be a little bit more satiny or smooth, while this side tends to be a little bit more, has more of a ribbed feeling. So I want to see the satiny side. So I'm going to put that face down to the garment. And I'm first going to do the sides. So I'm going to first sew it to the front. Here, I'm going to do it on both pieces, and I'm going to go ahead and stick a pin in this just to hold it together. I will have to remove the pin once I get over to the machine because I'll have to just reset everything. So I'm going to check on this one also, and I'm going to put this face side to the front at the side area. Okay. So just how you kind of see it like that. So we will actually fold this over and stitch it down and after we get it sewn. But I'm first going to sew it to the front, and then I'll come back and I'll sew it to the T-back. And again, we're going to be using the regular sewing machine, and I'm going to be using, I think, about a 2.5 stitch length, straight stitch. And since I speed that part up, what I'm going to tell you that I'm going to do here is I'm going to start here about the middle instead of starting at the edge, because some home sewing machines don't like to start right at the edge of a really bulky area. So I'm just going to make sure that I have this set pretty evenly for stitching it. And I'm going to stitch with the elastic side up and the suit side down. So if I start here at the very beginning, it won't take it, and then we might get wadded thread. But if I start here in the middle of that, I'll start here, and then I can either turn it around and stitch back, or I'll try back stitching and seeing if that works first. But I'm going to start in the middle of this so the machine grabs the underneath, all right? And it won't stretch it out a whole lot. So that's what I'm going to be doing. Okay, so now that we have the elastic straps sewn to the front, right, this is what it's going to look like. I actually can sew it to the sides of the T. So the way I like to do this first is I need to make sure it's going the right way. So I'm going to flip this over because this would be face side to face side. And then I will kind of lay this way, right? So this end goes on top of this one, and this end goes on top of this side. So I want to pin that there, just like I did before. And it looks like these sides are a little bit narrow. I needed to actually pull that a little bit more when I sewed it, so that they're an inch, but that's okay. So I'm going to get that one pinned in place. So that's why I was really rolling that. And we can see how I can kind of pull that out a little bit to get it to match. I'm just going to put a pin up here on this edge. And then I will kind of pull and stretch that to match the elastic edge, or pretty close. Okay, and then I'm going to actually start right here in the center of that. And you just wanted to lay those correctly so that when it turns to the regular side, and I'll kind of turn this face side out, that you have everything going the right way. Okay, so let me turn that back around and get it matched. So those are where I've kind of pinned it twice because I want the elastic to meet the edge of the garment. So I'll do that here on this side too. And of course, once I get over to the machine, I'll have to just readjust it. But I'm just doing this because I don't usually talk when I'm at the machine. I just kind of sew and speed that up for you. All right, so that'll be pretty close. And then I can sew starting in the middle to one end, and then I reversed to go back to the other side. Now, if your machine doesn't like to reverse, you can sew up to the edge, lift the presser foot, and then pivot this back around, and it will straight stitch back, and then put the needle down, lift the presser foot, pivot, and go back to the center. So that's just if your machine doesn't like to back stitch on these thicknesses, okay? So I'm going to get these sewn down. And again, I was using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. That's what is on the pattern. And so I'm stitching at a 1/2 inch from the edge. Okay, so now that we have the elastic sewn to the back, let me just turn this around so you can see everything. So here's the front. It's sewn to the front, and now it's sewn to the back. And we're going to overlock these edges and fold them toward the elastic and stitch them down so they won't stick out. But we have the back strap from the T down to the bottom of the pouch. So I have my elastic here. Again, I'm just going to check for which side I want this to go to. So I'm just going to lay this here. I'm going to just do it on the T part first. Get that pinned. It's just about an inch, but I'm going to pin it like I pinned the other side. I mean the sides of the T. All right, again, I'm going to start in the center, go to the edge, back stitch all the way, and then go straight back to the center. Okay, so now the strap is sewn to the back T part. So now we just need to fold this over, and we're going to attach it here to the bottom of the pouch. So we're going to have to go under this and match the face side of the elastic, whichever side you chose, and then match it to the face side of the garment, and you can just kind of fold it underneath. And if you're not sure what that really looks like, you can actually just go ahead and pin it across. That's how we would sew it, and then kind of pull it, and that's the way you want it to look, okay? So you can just kind of pull under here to get the actual seam, and then I'm just going to reposition this across there, and we want a straight seam, 1/2 inch seam. This one will kind of stick out just a little bit on the garment just because it was too hard to get this pattern to fit correctly, and we're going to be stitching at a 1/2 inch. Darn it, it got caught. Okay, and we're going to be stitching this down afterwards anyway to hide that seam. One of my sides is uneven there. That's okay. So 1/2 inch seam allowance straight across there. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing I did before. Start in the center, go to one side, and then back stitch all the way across, and then come forward again and end in the center. Okay, so now the back strap is sewn on. All of them are sewn on, and we just have 2 steps left. What we're going to do now is I'm going to go and overlock all of these edges so they're nice and clean, and then we're going to fold them and top stitch them down on the straight stitch machine. So I'm going to overlock all of these edges now. Don't try not to cut your threads all the way off, because what we'll do is we'll tuck them right underneath before we top stitch, and hopefully that will keep them encased in that seam allowance underneath. All right, so let's overlock all of these edges. Okay, so you saw me there overlocking all of these edges, and I didn't stop to trim. I just pulled them around and kept overlocking. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to clip them all apart in the middle of those threads, wherever they are. Makes it go a little bit quicker. As you saw, it didn't take me any time to do that. So they're all now released. Now I may need to trim a little bit. So what I was talking about, so I have this elastic. I'm going to fold it over here. And if you fold your extra threads in on top of that seam, and I'll trim these before I sew it, those are all on that seam allowance, and then we fold the elastic over that, and then we are going to top stitch all of the elastics to the seam allowance. It will hold those extra threads down and keep it from unraveling on that seam. So now I'm folding it toward the elastic. You could fold it toward the garment as well, but I want to let you know that it's going to be quite thick to top stitch across the garment there. If your machine will do that, that's great. But remember, you have elastic in here as well, folded underneath. So that's why I am choosing to fold this toward the elastic side. So let me just get this, see where that end is. Where did it go? There it is. So I'm just going to trim this up, not too short. Okay, and they're folded in there. And then I'm going to fold the elastic over it. Now you can pin it if you want to. Sometimes it's just easier to do all this at the machine. And then we're going about 1/4 inch away from that seam is where, or the edge of the presser foot is where I'm going to guide my machine to do a top stitch. And I'm using, you know, same stitch length, 2.5. So I'll probably stitch here and then go back. If my machine won't like the back stitching because the seam is so short and thick, that I may stitch, you'll see me stitch and then pivot around and go back the other way. So I'm going to do that to all of these. I'm not going to take the time to actually turn them all in here and pin them down. I'm just going to do that at the machine. You'll see me do that on all of these seams, okay? So I'm going to do that right now. And so there we are, the completed thong. So with these fun elastic straps, so you can get really creative if you have access to or find colored elastic. Again, this is designed for 1-inch wide elastic for the side and for the back strap. If you want to make it more narrow, you will have to decrease the widths of the suit itself. But there you go. Just one final note. Remember when we did the basting stitch for the lining, if you see some of your stitching like this, maybe you can see it on my hand there, these little loops right there, you can clip those and remove them like I'm going to do here, just for the visible ones, and just kind of, let me see if I can get this in the camera, kind of pull those threads out. Right? And then that thread will go away because you don't really need that anymore. And so now we have the completed thong with the elastic straps. So congratulations and have fun wearing it.